to kick off and we'll add people as they join. So we are very fortunate to have MJ Schoemaker, or MJ as we call her, as she's fondly known, from South Africa, and Jeremy Basckin, who's currently located in the UK. Both seasoned supply chain professionals with expansive knowledge on the topic of today. So the session today is your supply chain planning ready for the new generation of S&OP IBP? Get ready for an interactive benchmark session, seeing what supply chain planning is required in our new world, how S&OP has evolved, and benchmark your maturity against your peers. So that should be make for some interesting discussion and some interesting results, I imagine. So MJ and Jeremy, welcome. Thank you so much for doing this Apex, and fire away.
Okay, thank you, Tonya. So just as a quick introduction, a little bit about myself. So I have been in industry for over 30 years doing planning and supply chain and financial forecasting. 25 years with Unilever, from demand planning, supply planning, and what they call business planning or sales and operations planning, and rolled it out to 140 countries, and various roles in Johnson & Johnson and in Coca-Cola. And for the last 3.5–4 years, we've been helping business to do better planning and achieve their goals. So that's me. MJ? Want to do a quick introduction?
Yeah, hi everyone. Great to see some familiar names and faces. So I've also got my 30 years of experience. So we're 60 years together. I've worked across different types of industries. I worked for companies like Ricoh. I worked for Lego. There was a lot of playing around there. It was fun. And then I worked for Johnson & Johnson as well. That's actually where I met Jeremy. I'd spent a great deal of my career at Johnson & Johnson, at Janssen Pharmaceuticals, so I have a strong pharmaceutical background. Various global executive roles, going from customer service to demand planning. I was leading the global center of excellence for Janssen Pharmaceuticals, implementing across 32 countries to get statistical forecasting, and also was on the Center of Excellence for S&OP. So between Jeremy and I think we've got a good combination, and I hope you enjoy this session.
Okay, thanks, MJ. So yes, what we're intending to do today is just give you a little bit of an introduction. We're going to talk about supply chain planning, what it is, and the 3 elements of it. And as we go through this, we're going to have some check-ins. So you need to be ready with either your internet or your phones, or however you want to run parallel to this, because there's going to be 6 questions in each section, so you can benchmark where you are. And live, we can see against the whole audience, which is completely anonymous. So there's no email addresses or names to put in. You just put the code in and you just rate where you think you are, so we can have a good discussion to understand where are some of the challenges that we're seeing across supply chain planning. And then we'll go in to talk about S&OP and what the next generation of S&OP is and what the tools you need. And again, we're going to have another interactive session where you can put in your assessments across 8 questions, and we can have a little interactive discussion about where the maturity or where the common pinch points are. So what we're intending to do is not sit here and just present the topic to you, but also understand where everybody is, and are we struggling with the same type of things. So just a little bit about New Ways. Our mission is to provide everything you need to plan in a better way in one point. And what we want to do is make it easier, reliable, and affordable. Because as we're seeing with technology increasing, what we're seeing is the prices are dramatically coming down, and it's making it a lot easier to use the latest technology out there. I call it now, big companies with big systems used to have a competitive advantage. It's now the smaller companies that have the competitive advantage using these new functionalities, which are actually far better than the expensive systems. Our focus is really around 4 areas. So it's providing professional services, which is about analyzing, advising, and activating. A planning academy, so training, on-the-job training, but also classroom training and coaching. Technology solutions and managed services. So the managed services is we actually come in and run your operation for you and then hand it back, a fully commissioned one, rather than going through the learning curve that you require. So that's us in an overview. I'm going to hand you over to MJ to talk about what supply chain planning is.
Great, thanks, Jeremy. So in this slide, I think many of you will recognize this. This is a typical supply chain planning framework. What you see on the right are the customers. So they're the key to why we are here. We're making sure that they get what they need at the right time for the right place and the right price. When you look on the left, you see the suppliers. And then totally across to the left, you will see the operational, tactical, and strategic levels. So there are different levels within a framework, and all of them are very tightly linked to each other. So we all know that your strategy, your supply chain strategy is always linked to your business strategy. So when we look at the operational planning level, that is really what we're doing now. This is really what it's executional. We're busy with our purchasing. We're doing our planning for the production. We're scheduling. We're getting the business rolling. If you look from a tactical planning perspective, that's more on the let's say the next couple of months, sometimes up to a year to 24 months, where we're saying, what do we need in the future? So you go from now to the future. Demand planning, we all know a lot about forecasting as well. So it's getting a sense of where are we going so we can be ready for it. Sales and operations planning is a key part of that. And I'm not going to talk too much about it because Jeremy will touch on that later. And then obviously you have your strategic level where you're looking to the future in years. If you're seeing that your business is growing, you're estimating that you may need a machine. This might take longer than just a couple of months. Then you need to be sure about how you manage your network and what your strategy is around that. So if we look at from a S&OE perspective, which is sales and operations execution, then you'll see on the right there, it just appeared. So that's, as I mentioned, the executional level. Talking to your colleagues every week saying, okay, what happened last week? What happened this week? What do we need to fix? What do we need to do now? S&OP, future view. Tactical across to strategic. Okay. What controls do we have in place? So if you look to your right, you see the customers again. So the customers is what we're aiming for and how do we serve them as best we can. On the left, obviously, we need to start with a product. Once we have our product and we're managing our life cycle of that product, we need to understand what is demand reliability and what is our supply capability. Those two things together is what helps us to understand what we need to forecast, what we need to purchase. Then we look at how long does it take us to get those products. So if you have a 60-day lead time, you need to add that in. Otherwise, you're expecting the goods to come tomorrow, and that's not going to happen. So that all has to be anticipated. And then you look across your network. So where do those goods need to be? Where are most of my customers based? Does it have to be in Gauteng? Does it have to be in the Western Cape? Do I need it to be in Northern Europe, Southern Europe? And all those together will equal the inventory that you would need to service your customers. So what does that mean when we look at those different elements? So the product is what represents the growth of the business. The next box where you have demand and supply capability, adding on, multiplying by your lead times, multiplying by your network is the margin, so your cost. And then you have your inventories where your cash is lying. So you don't want to have all your cash sitting in your inventory if your inventory is not turning over, because that means that you're impacting your cash flow. So all these elements need to be controlled very, very well and well synchronized to make sure that you're delivering those business results you would like to have without any waste. Next one, thanks. So let's talk a little bit about demand planning. It's one of my favorite subjects. And demand planning is really looking at, okay, what's going to happen for the next 24 months, right? So looking at just what's happening tomorrow and the next day, you should already have that inventory. You should already have that in your planning, but you also need to try and anticipate what is going to happen. So if we look at forecasting groups and segmentation, the top of this diamond, then you see that is how you set up what you are going to forecast. So you have forecasting groups. So you can say, well, I have some products that are hard to forecast. There are some products that are easy to forecast. Some products can run on their own if you have some sort of forecasting tool. And then you have segmentation. How important are your products to you? Do you have your A products? Those are the ones that are driving your business. Those are the ones that normally cover 80% of your turnover, or normally 20% of your products. And then we look at the analyze level, the yellow one, history cleansing. So if you use the history, if you look at the sales you did in the past and you just generate that forward, you may have had some events that happened that you don't think are going to happen again. It could have been a stock out. It could have been that you had a huge sale. It could be that you had a price reduction. And those things need to be cleansed out of the history. Otherwise, it's just going to repeat in the future when you choose your models. And that could be a seasonal model. It could be a linear model, depending on how that product is behaving as from a demand perspective. So a lot of clients tend to say, I'm just going to use the history I have, but then they find out, but it's so zero sales in the future months. You say, yeah, because you had zero sales before and maybe the line was down. So you really have to do that part. Is very, very important. Then we look at baseline generation. And our baseline generation should be unconstrained. That means you shouldn't be already taking into consideration what I can't supply, what I can supply. It's after all the cleansing, this is what I think I'm going to sell. This is truly what the market needs from me. And then you go and look at what are the events that are being planned. You talk to sales and marketing. You ask them, is there going to be a price increase? Are you going to do a promotion? What are the things that can impact the demand? And that you then feed into your baseline. And then you discuss that forecast with those different partners, and you agree and validate the figures. So everyone should be aligned. Supply chain doesn't work by themselves. They need to work across all the different elements of the organization to ensure that we all agree that this is the way we're going to go forward. So Jeremy spoke a little bit about that we're going to do some questions and answers so that we can look at some polling. So what he's showing here is, if you could please all log into www.menti.com. I'll give you some time to do that. And then you use code 342175. So the idea here is that you go to each question and then you give it a rating between 1 and 4. So 1 means no, we don't do that. Is your sales history captured, cleansed, and segmented? So 1 means no, we don't do much of that. 4 means yes, that's what we do. 3 means we meet the basic standards. So we sort of look at it and then we move on. And then number 2 means needs improvement, which means you try and do it, but you can see through your results that there's more to be done. The second question is, do you apply statistical models to your demand? So are you doing a more sort of naive forecasting where you're just copying basically what happened in the past, or are you actually using statistical models? Do you define a baseline and regular rate of sales? Are market insights, promotions, innovations, and marketing drivers overlaid? So that's where I spoke about events, saying, are you actually enriching that data? Do you validate it and sense check it with those partners? And then do you monitor and track forecast KPIs performance with improvement plans? So do you check, did I forecast well with the offset that makes sense for you? And then what am I going to do about it if it didn't go well? So Jeremy, you're in the background checking to see how everyone's answering.
Yeah, and everyone, don't forget to submit once you've done it. So here we can see the number of people in the bottom right hand corner. Here is how many people have entered, and then here we can see where our scores are coming out. So we'll give it a few more minutes, but please don't forget to press the submit button. Okay.
So if you can't remember the code, it's at the top of the screen.
All right. Okay, great. So what we're seeing here is that there's actually quite a high maturity of demand planning in this group, because, as we said, 1 means there's little evidence, 2 means obviously you need to improve, 3 means you've got some basic standards in place, and 4 means, well, actually we've got good practice. So generally when we do this, we on average see the marks round about the 2.5. So this is what we're seeing is quite a mature score here. And then with that also we're seeing that there's quite an even spread across all of them between about 2.9 and 3. So the one that's effectively got the lowest mark of that is the one that says, do you apply statistical models to your demand? So it looks like a lot of people are using what we say past or naive forecasting, which says this is what I sold last year, or this is what I sold last month, so therefore this is what I'm likely to sell in the future, as opposed to seeing if there's any seasonality or any type of variance that goes in with that. Okay, good. So that was what we will do is with the decks, or however we circulate them, we will capture these results, and they will go with however the circulation of the information is done. Okay, I'm going to move back onto the next one. MJ, if you want to take us through supply planning.
Okay, so supply planning, again, we're looking at, what is your capacity from a resource, material, equipment perspective for the next 24 months. So you see on your left, you see the demand plan. So the demand plan drives everything. And then you have your inventory requirements. So obviously when you fill in your demand plan, you say, I need 10, but I have 5 on stock. So you work out, what do I still need to produce? You have the combination of your master resources and your detailed scheduling, and those two together are always optimized. So depending on what your demand and inventory requirements are. So in supply planning, I think a lot of you probably know this, that you have your master production schedule, you understand your capacity utilization, you understand your material requirements, and you have your operation scheduling. So these 4 elements are key to ensure that whatever is coming from the demand plan and from the inventory requirements are then balanced, optimized, and then you can have an understanding of where you're going for the next 24 months. So here we also want to do another polling for you. So you still are on menti.com. You have your code 342175, and you should see these questions coming up. The rating keys are as before: 1, little evidence; 2, needs improvement; 3, meets basic standards; and 4 is good practice.
Okay, so we'll go into...
So far we can see 2 have started doing it. Give you more time. Oh, this one looks interesting.
So what we try to understand is, do you understand what your actual capacities are against your actual performance? Do you create what we call a master schedule, which is quite a high level schedule, not in detailed, so you can look further out, and this is where we look across the horizons. And then understand that capacity utilization against that, and then we go into this detailed scheduling, which drives your lines and your productions, which is your operation, your operational ones. And do you actually sense check these plans, and do we monitor what we call plan conformance? So we have a set of plans, but how well are we actually conforming to those plans? Okay. So again, if we just have a look at the scores that are coming through, we just see that the one with the lowest score at the moment is, do you schedule your operations with a frozen period? So that means to say, if you know that your materials or your ingredients or your resources have a fixed time of a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, that in that short period, you don't change it, or what we say a frozen horizon, because even if you change those plans, you actually can't get a lot of the resources or the materials. And the ones that has scored the highest here is sense checking and validating your plan, which is good to see. Okay. We'll move on to inventory.
Yeah. So inventory planning, we've touched on it a couple of times because obviously it crosses across all the elements of supply chain. Normally when you have your inventory planning, you have policies in place. So there's an understanding of how much inventory do you want to carry of certain products. We spoke about the segmentation. What are those policies that you want to have in place? We talk, and you'll see some of these boxes have S&OP in them. So these are the key ones that are also discussed in the S&OP environment, where you talk about the cycle stock, so your batch production cycles, your safety stock. So how do we buffer against the demand and supply variability and the lead times? And I'm sure in the times of COVID, we've come across that quite a lot, where we're saying, I had my safety stock, but all of a sudden the borders were closed and there's some pile up in the harbor, and I can't get my shipment in as I expected. So how well were those safety stocks working for you? And sometimes, you know, if you're in a situation like COVID, then you normally try and optimize your safety stock because you don't want to carry too much stock, and you're working like that, and then something like this happens. But the safety stock is really an important element, and I think it was sorely tested with the COVID-19. We have the pre-build, so what are we going to carry for strategic purposes? There may be, for example, a tender that you're looking at, you're not sure if you're going to win it. Should we carry 50% anyway, just in case we win the tender? Or is there something going to happen? Could be that the line is down and we need to get some stock so that we can continue with our sales while we're not producing. We have transit, obviously to help to cover the demand during the transit time. So while something is on the way, are we sure we have enough inventory whilst that is in transit? Quarantine, especially in the pharma industry, and I think many others, you know, products are produced, but they go into quarantine first because they have to go through a QA process. So, you know, sometimes what the errors that happen is that a business will actually put their quarantine stock as part of inventory, and then they think they can sell it, but they can't. And obviously you have the idle stock, so the slow moving obsolete. You don't want to have that. How do you manage that? So again, we want you to answer some questions about classifying your inventory. So you have an ABC classification. What do you have policies in place against how you want to manage your cycle stock and safety stock? Do you have a forecast inventory projection? So can you actually project how much inventory you're going to be carrying month by month? Because that helps you obviously with your managing your warehousing. Do you track your inventory against targets? Do you have a target that you set for your inventory? And how do you have a process to manage idle stock? So again, ratings: 1 for little evidence, 2 needs improvement, 3 meets the basics, and 4 is benchmark. Let's see how we're doing. So we have 10 people so far.
Okay. So the interesting one there is, do you manage idle stock or obsoletes or slow movers across the business? What you tend to find, it's always a supply chain problem if you have too much stock, too little stock, or stock that's not moving, but the business doesn't always realize that these other functions are creating a lot of the issues. And when you start getting to that level where other functions start having some responsibility for it, that's where you start seeing some of the big improvements coming through. And the ones that are being scored quite high is, do you classify your inventory? So it's good to see that we classify it against either an ABC or prioritization, and then also that we have inventory policies in place. Okay, right. Thanks, MJ. So what we have done is hopefully that gives you an idea for the three main components that make up what we call supply chain planning. It's not all the components as we saw from the introduction, but it gives you the main ones, but it also gives you a feel for what you're doing well and where maybe you should focus a little bit. So we'll move on to say, let's talk about S&OP stroke IBP. We call it business planning. So it's the same framework that you saw earlier on, but if you look at the extra bits that have been added on is we bring in the product planning, we bring in the activity planning, and also we bring in financial integration. So what effectively maturity of sales and operations planning is making sure we can do our demand and supply and balance it. And then we start bringing in the strategic element and the financial element, and that's what effectively they now call IBP, integrated business planning. So as we've seen everything that MJ took us through on the supply chain planning network, we now add on the product activity, product planning. So what products do we need? What is our life cycle modeling? And activity planning, which are promotions, and our events that we currently want to achieve. So if we just want to recap of what are the 5 business planning steps for what we call business planning. The first step is always to say, do we understand what our product range, our life cycle modeling is, and what gaps do we currently have in the business that we need to have some type of activity or some type of event. So that's always our first step in the planning process, to understand our products and what activities are we going to do. So against that, we then work out what our demand is likely to be. So we have the history, the statistical modeling, but then also we need to compare it to what products are coming in, what products are going out, and what events or promotions are we doing. So it overlays that on top of it, and therefore we're able to validate it and generate a new plan. So this becomes our new, what we say, an unconstrained demand plan. We then have a look at our supply and confirm, what are our supply capabilities? Has anything changed? Has lines performance gone up? Has a material supplier got less capacity or more capacity? Has our warehousing gone up or capacity, or has it gone down? Are there issues with transport? Are we foreseeing transport strikes, etc.? So we need to therefore build in and understand what our capacities and our capabilities are to supply. And against that, we reconcile it. So we take that demand and we reconcile it against our supply. And this is where we need to make some choices and some trade-offs, and also some decisions, because this is a decision-making forum where we go into what we call decision-making. And then we go into the final decision-making where the executive or the leadership team make those decisions of what are we going to do to close the gaps. We expect that we bring them options. You can either do this, this, and this. These are the costs. And therefore, we make some decisions against that and then communicate that new plan back into the business. So those are the 5 standard business planning steps that have been around for 40 years. Why can't we get them right? Well, it's always difficult. It takes the right leadership and behaviors to really prioritize, to set our goals, and have the right structures to move away from firefighting to seizing future opportunities. We always have the challenges of short-term business goals override. We need to deliver the month, or we need to deliver the quarter. So all our plans go out of the window. We have such large workload to collect all the data that we haven't got the information to make decisions. Leadership don't always support the process. We don't have time for these monthly meetings because it takes a lot of our time whilst we're running. We make decisions outside of the process. We have lack of understanding from the leadership and the participants. What are they actually supposed to do? What decisions are they supposed to make? We have multiple forecasts. We have the demand planning have their plans. Sales have their plans. Marketing have their plans. Finance have their plans. So we're finding that there's lots of different plans in the business, and it's undisciplined following the process. So there's lots of challenges that keep us from just using those 5 basic steps. And this isn't an S&OP session, but it's about, okay, we recognize that we just don't put in those steps, and it's easy to do. The biggest drawback that we're finding in today's environment that's holding people back is actually having the information to have the right level of discussion and to make the right decisions. And therefore, everyone has their own Excel spreadsheet and doing their own decisions independently. So again, we're just going to have a look at saying how mature is my S&OP IBP maturity. In the same format, it should be up now and running for you to input your S&OP IBP things. And the 8 questions that we ask you is, first of all, how well prepared are those 3 main meetings that are the preparation and where the information sits in your S&OP? So that's your product and activity, your demand, and your supply. Do we have that information? Is it prepared? Do we have it in our monthly cycle? The next thing is about assumptions. Do we understand what assumptions are? And in today's world, this has become even more important, because what is the assumptions that you're going to use for the next month based on the COVID that you're seeing? Are you in an industry that you're finding that there's a huge demand for? Or are you in an industry where there's no demand for? So what does this month look like? What does the following month look like? And what does the month after that? And also, by the way, we make those assumptions, and then we also make assumptions for what does wave 2 look like. All of a sudden, we've seen Germany that was one of the first countries in Europe to come out of lockdown. All of a sudden, they're seeing huge rates coming through now in northern Germany. So they're seeing a second wave, and they're going into a second lockdown. What does that happen? And what are the assumptions that you need to make against that second wave, etc.? Do we validate the data against our performance? It's no good just every month running the cycle and not realizing, oh, we've got issues. Are we learning from those issues? The other key thing for S&OP is the volume and value reconciled, because what we find is you need to be tweetaler. You need to be able to speak volume and value throughout the process, because not everyone understands volume and not everyone understands value. And therefore, it's really important that we look at both of those. Are we seeing what those gaps are across the functions? Are there demand sales gaps? Are there marketing or product gaps? Are there supply gaps? Are there warehousing gaps? Are we being truthful and being able to show those? And then it's no good just saying, I've got a gap, I have a problem. What are the options? You go back and say, these are the 3 options that I have to close the gaps. And do leadership own the process? Do they walk the talk? And do we align all our plans together and prioritize them? So those are the 8 fundamentals that we need to run S&OP, especially in this environment, understanding where those gaps are, understanding what our assumptions are, that we're all clear of what we work to. So let's see how we are scoring on this. So if we have a look at leadership owning the process and aligning and prioritizing our against functions and also assumptions, those are the ones that are the lowest, the lowest scoring ones. So and that's actually quite an interesting one. Is one of the biggest things we find that S&OP or IBP doesn't work is because leadership don't own the process. They just think it's the bottom-up process. They come with their top-down plans, and then they just take their top-down plans, and therefore we don't really get involved in talking about those gaps. And also the assumptions are quite low as well. And especially in today's environment, this was something that should become a really important thing across the business. What are the assumptions that we're all working to? Okay, right. So we're now going to carry on with that. So there are no further checks. There's a couple of other slides for us to go to, is to talk about the new world that we find ourselves in. We call this the VUCA world. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about it, but it's the new norm. It's the new norm. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So how do we deal with this in our business, and what are the things that we're seeing trends happening in the market? So there's a rapid change that's required of how we do, you know, how people, process, and technology needs to change to this new VUCA world. What it used to be about was about driving efficiency. Management were driving efficiency. It's now, because we're in this VUCA world, this is where we need true leaders to step up and to give us guidance about how people need to learn. There's new skills, there's new technology. So how do we embrace that new technology, especially in today's, you know, you need the data now to make the decision. I can't wait a few days or a few weeks because the world is changing so quickly. And it takes the leadership to make sure that they putting those assumptions together, that's everyone's work to, they're putting in place the necessary technologies, strategies, and they're putting in place the people strategies and the people capabilities. And that's what we say. We need agility, you need flexibility, you need speed, you need innovative, you need to be optimizing your processes, you need to be using more predictive tools, you need to be capable, and it takes leadership to drive this. And you know, this is how we set out our plans against those 4 boxes. And we talk to ourselves about how good are we able to predict things, and what outcomes do we think are likely to happen. We talk about the known knowns, so we say, well, this we know, and then we talk the unknown unknowns. Well, we know nothing about this, so if we know nothing about it, we need to make some assumptions about it. And how much do you know about the current situation? So this is how we plot our information and our data against those 4 boxes we talked about. And the key thing to make a success of this is about having that visibility, having those assumptions, which we talked about, having some scenarios, the what if scenarios. What if this happens? What happens, you know, when we talk about supply chains now, we should be modeling our supply chains to say, what does my supply chain look like when the rand to the dollar is $15? Sorry, 15 rand to the dollar. What does my supply chain look like when it's 25 rand to the dollar? What does my supply chain look like when it's 30 rand to the dollar? So we need to think about all these different scenarios and these different models, not to say, oh, we don't know what we're doing because it's fluctuating. No, you've worked out what the scenarios are, the best way to manage your business, the best channel to go into, the way you distribute, the way you import against all those scenarios and those models. And then start identifying your risk, your opportunities. And once we've done all of that, the most important thing is communicate it to the business. Communicate, communicate, communicate. So everyone's clear about what they're doing and why they're doing it. So that's how we deal with the VUCA world. And then the final thing is to just say, you know, we've identified data is, you know, very key in making decisions. And what we're seeing is that to do planning is we talk about the APS or Advanced Planning System. How do we enable our operations with these advanced planning systems? And a lot of businesses have ERP systems that they think, oh, it can do something, so therefore that's fine for us to do what we need to do. But when you start looking at ERPs, you either don't have the processes and people are doing lots of manual spreadsheets, or it has some basic things like basic stats, basics, master planning schedules, basic material requirements planning, but it doesn't give you the technology that you now need to run your business. And that's why lots of businesses are moving to these APS systems to run parallel with your ERP or in your ERP, where you can start looking at multiple things like customer and location, dynamic changes. So as soon as your volume changes, you can rechange your MPS, so you can change your master plan, you can change your MRP, you can do that, and you're able to look at volume and value throughout the process, so you can see what does this do for my COGS, what does this do for my information. And then you go into the new advanced stuff where we're using AI scenarios, the what if analysis, and a lot of the routine stuff is now being automated like, well, if I change my demand plan, It automatically tells me what my production plan is. It automatically tells me what my inventory projections are going to be for the next year. And it automatically tells me what my customer service level is going to be, with no one having to spend hours and days and calculating. And also, by the way, it will tell you what your COGS are, your cost of goods sold. So you can see every time you make a decision, if you take your volume up or you take your volume down, or if you want to run overtime on a particular line, automatically you'll see what that means to your balance sheet or your P&L. That's what we talk about automation with the new tools are out there. And to give you an example, a lot of the new tools that are coming out are quite modular. So it doesn't mean that you have to go and buy a whole suite of things. You can buy modules. So there's sales forecasting modules, demand planning, inventory, supply planning, production schedule, capacity modules, and then integrated finance. So this is just an example of a tool that we use of all the different modules and how you can bring it together, how it uses artificial intelligence, how you automate your workflows. But then also from an ERP point of view, again, the ERPs are now coming in modular form. So this is another example is, you buy these modules for which module you require for your particular part of the business, and the barriers to entry have significantly declined. So for instance, this type of tool to run 5 licenses is now costing you 10,000 Rand a month to run this with a number of modules on. So the technology out there and the information out there and the barriers to entry have drastically reduced. This is just another example of a decision board where it can create all your reports for you in your meetings. So what does that mean? What does a good S&OP dashboard and template, we talk about all this information, need to you? So what we do is we end up pulling something together like this, which a lot of these tools, these new tools and technology I've talked about has in place. So you can see, first of all, the bottom line, it talks about your operation. So you can see how your operation is running instantaneously, from your supply conformance, what's being utilized, what is my cost per lead time, what is fixed, what is a fixed cost and a variable cost, because that'll help you make a decision. It tells you what your inventory days are and your value is. It tells you what your idle stock is against the percentage of revenue against the different categories. And it also can tell you your service. And on top of that, it predicts what your inventory projection is now. Well, we're actually going to be 2% down with our current plan. And my service projection is projecting that I'm going to have a 99% service level, and that's gone up. So that's how we bring some of the tools from an operational point of view. Similarly, this shows you how your sales are doing. So you can see how your product category is doing. You can see what is volume, value, and profit. And you can say, well, actually, I need to change my product portfolio or help you with your life cycle modeling. This tells you what your activity revenue and plans are doing. This is telling you how good your demand forecasts are. This is looking at forecast bias in both volume and value. So we're starting to see those different things that come through. On top of that is you're starting to see NPDs and promotions and your sales plan. So you can get a full view of your sale live happening all the time. And then on top of that, you can see what your finance situation is. What your sales are coming from your previous plan, your big 5 customers, your discounters, your wholesalers, your retailers, etc. And you can see what your sales give you, and you can start seeing what your gap is versus your target. And similarly, with your EBITDA. So you can see where my GP is, where my COGS are, where's my advertising and promotions, where my indirects are. So you can start seeing this live, making decisions. So if I put in more volume, I can see straight away, or if I put in more sales, I can see what happens with my supply conformance. And then also looking at your plans further out, your risk and opportunities. And what we always say is look previous, understand your previous and performance, learn from that in terms of improvements, and have a look what your forward view is. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of insights on the new technology and the new information that we need to have in hand, so we can start driving our S&OP processes with these type of information and these type of dashboards. And this is where it really engages the leadership, because all of a sudden when they see this, they're forced to make decisions. And when they're forced to make decisions, that's when they start using S&OP because they can really see how this adds value to the business. So hopefully from MJ and myself, that was useful and giving you some insights and also some views of where people are performing from a benchmarking. So we just open it up for any questions.
Okay, so there's a question here. Totally agree on the constraints you mentioned. Why IBP and S&OP is often not fully adopted for the buying of the business to use one set of numbers, particularly one unconstrained sales forecast. Have you ever managed to achieve this or seen it done successfully in your experience?
Okay, that's a very good question. So the answer is yes, but it takes time. And what we talk about is, where do you start with in terms of your improvement plans? And generally what we say is, if you can't see what the problem is, you can't fix it. So it's, first of all, we talk about visibility. Understanding where those challenges are is our first step that we normally do when we go. What is stopping us from creating a plan that everyone works to? So we don't talk about one number, we talk about one plan, because everyone should work off the same plan. Because what we do find is, when you start having divisions and subdivisions and sub-businesses, sometimes people are playing within those sub-businesses with their numbers. We're not interested. We're interested in getting to that plan, that everybody works off the same plan. So when we start with that visibility we talk about, is understanding what is stopping us from creating a demand plan that is reliable. And when we say reliable, the way that we measure that is through the forecast bias. And we don't measure it as a total business. You go down to either a category or a segment, or even at a customer level, because you can see which areas are continuously over forecasting or under forecasting. Because as soon as you have people under forecasting or over forecasting, then your supply chain says, well, I'm not going to make that stuff because they always under forecast by 5%, or they always over forecast by 5%. So therefore, I'm going to second guess what they're going to do, because they're not being reliable with us. So that's where we need to identify where those culprits are coming from, and it's about to identify them. And we talk about handicaps. So we talk about, right, this sales team, we're giving you a 5% handicap because you constantly over forecast by 5%. We have two options. Either you adjust your handicap, or we will adjust your handicap for you. We would rather not do it, because that's not in the spirit of creating one plan. So those where you have those conversations. And it's similarly what happens sometimes. You find factories are running their production, and you know what, we're having a really good run today, so I've already reached my production plan, but actually, because I'm having such a good run and I can keep my cogs down, I'm going to carry on running for an extra couple of hours and make too much inventory. So that's where we measure what we say the conformance to plan, and we identify who are those people that aren't conforming to the plan and why, because that creates everyone to have their own plan. And similarly, you go on in each step of your S&OP process and make that visible through the metrics and through what we call the behaviors. What are the behaviors that are driving people to do certain elements? And then the final step is the bottom up versus the top down. So the business will do a bottom up plan, and the leadership team will come and say, well, but the target's 100 and you've given me of 190. By the way, the number's 100. And that leadership intervention also gets measured as well. And quite interesting, we were working with the business last year where the business refused to do a demand plan because they said, whatever we do, the leadership come and tell us a different number. So why spend all that time doing all that work when it gets overwritten? And that's where you need to have that intervention and that really what we call brutal, honest discussion. Okay, so how are we going to manage the bottom up and the top down?
Yeah, I think the first thing you do is actually, we usually just tackle leadership first, because if they're not on board, the rest of the organization won't follow. Yeah. So, you know, you often have the people on the ground who are trying their best, exactly that what Jeremy said, but we're bleeding every night trying to get this demand plan right, and then you just go and tell us something else. So we just go straight to leadership and say, we have to talk to you first, and then we take it from there. That's the only way to get that success.
Okay, Ron, does that help you?
Happy, Grant?
Yes, it does. Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, Grant.
Good answer. Thanks for that.
Okay, so we have a question here from Dave. Do you believe our supply chain skills levels are good enough to implement IBP and APS?
Well, that's a great question, Dave. I think you can't just say across the board, you know, how are our skills looking without assessing them. So normally what we do is assess the business first across those people, process, and technology to find out, are the skills there to implement to IBP? Because you have to have certain characteristics amongst the people, and it's not just the knowledge, but it's also the mindset, the analytical mindset, the understanding of the financials versus the volume. So I think it's a very broad question, but that has to be assessed first before you can actually say I can implement IBP. I think you know, from my experience here in talking about the South African market, I think we've got to get S&OP right first. Down to the S&OE level before you can start implementing the IBP. Jeremy, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's always good to do a skills assessment, and it's always good to do training on people to build it. But what we talk about is we talk about training the 10, 20, 70 training. So 10% of your knowledge is learned by classroom training. 20% is by mentor training, so you can see someone doing something good and you can learn from them. And then the other 70% is learned what we call on-the-job training. Now, the challenge is always is that you find that there's some very good and skilled people, but they don't know what good looks like. So how do you describe to them what good looks like? So that's where you need to help them through the 10, the 20 and the 70% different capability building programs, as we call it, to build up those skills. But also what we find is that there's two other big issues that happen. Businesses identify, oh, we have a skill gap, so we'll send someone on a training course, job done. But that only covers the 10%. And that's why it's more to focus on that other 20 and 70%, the on-job, on how you do that training. And the second thing is we don't give our people the right tools. So what we do is the tools that we currently have, and a lot of them have, is very difficult to use. And also they haven't been defined to your business process. So the first question we always ask when we go into the business, tell me about your workarounds. And those workarounds are all the Excel spreadsheets that everybody has in their top drawer. Why do you have that Excel spreadsheet? Oh, because the system doesn't do this, and the system doesn't do this, and it can't give me this number, and can't do that, or I don't know how to use the system to do that. So that's why you need to address those workarounds. And generally what we find is that, you know, the new technology is out there that we were describing. What we find is it's taking on average between 3 to 5 days to get a person fully proficient on a piece of technology, where your older technology is taking between 3 to 6 months to get someone proficient on that. You know, it's plug and play. It's like using an iPhone 11 versus using the old Nokia without the screen, and we're asking them to do their job, and it's not user friendly. So I think there's a number of combinations there that need to be worked on to come across. And it always comes down to, you know, people, process, because if your processes aren't right, and having the right set of tools and simple to use.
Okay. Are there any other questions from the floor? Everybody's very quiet. So I have a question. Is there a way to get, because buy-in from leadership is always difficult. You know, you've got to get them sold on it. They want to see results. I mean, if I look at other implementations that have been done on other projects, it's the leaders and management CEOs have got to buy into it. How do you get them to buy into it without a complete overhaul or a massive investment? Are there small projects or bite-sized chunks that you can do to start seeing some results, or do you have to go, you know, all in? Are there some quick solutions that you can show, okay, we're getting results here, this is why we should be adopting this full-blown for the business?
So I think it comes about, we always talk about visibility. And, you know, we go into lots of businesses and we work with them, and then we say, well, your forecast bias is all over the place. And they say, yes, but we don't have these fancy tools, and we don't have statistical models, and we haven't got this, and we can't do this, and the leadership's not prepared to invest in them. So we just say to them, it's simply, very simple thing. Take your top 5 worst performing, to the top 5 positive SKUs, and take your top 5 negative SKUs, just take those 10 and go and work out what's causing that, what's causing that problem. And they'll come back and they'll say, oh, you know what's causing that problem is either that we don't have visibility because our MRP, our materials requirements planning system's not working, or the demand is always too high, and there's a number of reasons, but you'll find very quickly that there becomes 2 or 3 very common themes. And when you go back to the senior leadership and you say to them, you know, we're always struggling with not having the right product in the right place. Yes, the supply chain's rubbish. No, it's not rubbish. These are the 3 big reasons. And we need you to help us unlock these 3 reasons, which we've identified for you. You find that the leadership, I've never come across a leader that says, well, I don't want to unlock these because this is holding my business back.
Okay. I think it's nice for people to understand that there is a small bite-sized piece that you can do, and it's easier to get buy-in from leaders from that approach than it is to get a full-blown implementation done. MJ?
And what you saw there, Tonya, is you know, I think CEOs often and MDs think everything's very expensive, and Jeremy spoke to it earlier. You know, that there are very good cloud-based programs now out there that are not expensive. We don't have the typical millions that it's costing the company to implement, and they're all modular. So you can say, okay, I'm going to start with forecasting. If you don't do any forecasting at all, let's start with that. Get that right, and then move on to the next one. So there's software that costs 3,000-4,000 Rand a month, and it'll do your inventory and your forecasting and your purchase orders. And it's all in the cloud. You just have to log in, and then you just pay a subscription. So I think those days of having these huge costs are not there anymore. It depends, what do you want? And as the business is growing, you can actually grow with those models. So you can say, well, I want to start small because I can't afford anything else, which is the one I must do first. We normally say forecasting, you need to know what's coming. Start with that, and let's move on from there. So I think, you know, they need to understand that it's not always that costly, and it's more costly not to do something.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I certainly agree there. But that's food for thought. So if anybody is looking to get busy with a little project there, to start doing some business turnaround, you know,
top 5 worst and top 5 best, and see why.
There you go.
You can do that in Excel if you have to.
You know what? It sounds terrible, and Excel is the one thing, and it's, you know, Excel is the one glue that seems to hold supply chains together, whether we like it or not. The bulk of information sits somewhere in an Excel spreadsheet. It's absolutely bizarre. If you think about the money that's spent on systems and integration of plugins and modules and all sorts of things, there's always an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah.
You've got to give Excel credit where it's due.
And that's why is, you know, the way of the past used to be, it was the computer says, no, this is how you run your system, your business. This is how you run your supply chain. And because computer says no, everyone went and created the Excel spreadsheets. The new technology is so flexible that you actually find using an Excel spreadsheet is too much hard work now.
It's too slow. Yeah.
It's too slow. Yeah. It's too much hard work.
Yeah. A lot of those the new kind of software even is like Excel on steroids. So people who are on Excel, when they see it, they go, oh my gosh, I want that.
Okay, so that is so that's a wrap. I don't see any more questions. Jeremy and MJ, you're okay that we make your details available for anybody with any questions?
Yeah, sure.
And you are happy that we share the webinar?
Absolutely.
Yes. And what we will do is we will copy those results from those surveys that people did into the presentation, and we can make that available through yourselves.
Perfect. That's fantastic. Thank you, Jeremy and MJ. Thank you so much.
Thank you for allowing us the time.
It's our pleasure. We are always looking for ways to expand and educate our community, keep them up to date on what's going on. So yeah, thank you guys. Thanks for everybody for attending. Any questions, we'll make Jeremy and MJ's details available. You can fire them straight off to them. But thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yes, bye.
Was.